VitalHoops is for the culture.
Peace, Jumbo. Welcome to the VitalHoopsPodcast. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB. I am your host. If you haven't yet, I definitely encourage you to check out part 1, episode number 58 with Bouna and Mbaye. This is a continuation. We got into some more, South Africa, Palestine, and the interconnection between the struggles. Hope you enjoy it. Please like, share, subscribe. Check it out. Part 2 with Bouna. By the way, for everybody, all the listeners, down in the description, there's going to be a list of, all the books so that, we can get to that history and all the important things that Bouna quoted. Because like you said, Bouna, we don't know our history, we don't know our history.
And I'm not blaming our brothers and sisters for not knowing part of the history that we've been talking about, because there has been an successful attempt to make us, not be aware of that history. Because history is basically not necessarily written by us.
Absolutely. It's not. And specifically our radical history. Our radical history. Yeah.
And Doroba bin Hawad, whom you mentioned previously, also says that it's one of the challenges that the new generation of activists is facing, is that we are totally disconnected with our radical history.
Absolutely.
So since we are disconnected with our radical history, we try to invent things that have been already experienced in the past.
Yeah.
That had been successful or failures, but because we don't have that background, that knowledge of our radical history, we tend to reinvent failure. This is one of his expressions, the reinvention of failure. So, but history is a powerful weapon.
Yes.
Malcolm X, in one of his most famous speeches, The Ballot or the Bullet, 1964, he said, "The white man made the mistake of letting me read his history books."
Yeah,
he said his favorite topic has always been history, because people are manipulating history in order to justify the injustices that are inflicting upon other people. That's what's happening in Palestine.
Yeah.
Saying that we've never oppressed any other people in the world, so you cannot accuse us of being oppressive to the Palestinians, or black people have always been supported by Euro-American Jews, so you have to be grateful.
You have to be grateful and supportive.
The way to express your gratitude is to condone or co-sign anything that the state of Israel can do,
right?
Including to Afro-Palestinians, because we haven't had time to discuss it, but there are some Afro-Palestinians in
absolutely,
Palestine.
Absolutely. We got a couple more questions, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Try to make it not too long, because otherwise the viewers will be,
Are you saying the Vital Hoops viewers are not focused enough, man?
No, I'm not saying that.
You saying they can't concentrate?
I've been doing a lot of podcasts, and they've always advised me to make things not longer than 1 hour, because after 1 hour, people, they lose the concentration. But hopefully, it will be useful to
TikTok,
brothers and sisters.
TikTok and Instagram got us with the quick information. All right, all right. There were many South African Jews who fought alongside Mandela and his comrades in the anti-apartheid struggle. Could you talk about the contribution of South African Jews to the freedom struggle in South Africa?
It has been a significant contribution, but once again, this is also part of history that some people have been trying to rewrite in order to justify their current policies that are not necessarily consistent with what those South African Jews, whom we'll be talking about shortly, fought for during their lifetime. And I'm just going to give an example. I was on the website of the South African Zionist Federation, one of the most historically powerful organization of the South African Jewish community. And they in 2022, they announced that there will be a ceremony taking place in Tel Mon in Israel to launch a memorial garden that, for the first time, and I'm quoting the statement they made on the website, memorial garden that for the first time commemorates a remarkable group of South African Jews who contributed to the struggle against apartheid. Okay, so far so good, as well as gave support to the state of Israel. Okay, so here you see the first contradiction: fighting settler colonialism in Africa, and at the same time co-signing, condoning, supporting settler colonialism in South Africa, in Israel,
In Israel.
in historic Palestine, right? First contradiction, but that's not the only one. So they say one of the representatives of South African Zionist Federation said there were many South African Jews who contributed to South Africa's liberation and were supportive of Israel's establishment and development. These heroes have never been recognized and many are not well known, yet these were instrumental in helping to build better society in South Africa and Israel. We are researching the stories of honorees to be commemorated in Gansia Bonga, which include artists, rabbis, musicians, lawyers, educators, doctors, parliamentarians, those who went into the township to feed the hungry, and even those who took up arms in South Africa against the apartheid government. This is funny because the South African Zionist Federation was one of those two powerful organizations in South Africa under apartheid. The other one was the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, two organizations that supported apartheid.
Mm.
Okay? Because they saw apartheid as a system that was benefiting them directly. It was
Right.
oppressing the majority of black people, but as South African Jews who were white, quote unquote, identified as so-called white, they were benefiting from the system. And the South African Jewish Board of Deputies Zionist Federation, South African Zionist Federation, were obviously enthusiastic supporters of Israel. They did not denounce publicly the apartheid regime until very late, okay, until 1985, when even some leaders of South Africa apartheid were already denouncing the system. Okay, so this is another instance of disgusting, disgraceful rewriting history,
Yeah.
to give a good image to people who behaved in a disgraceful manner during apartheid. Okay, I don't want to sound too judgmental. Okay, we also, if we want to understand what's those historic developments, we also have to take into account that for several decades, the so-called Jewish question and anti-Semitism has been one of the key issues in South African political life. Okay, you cannot analyze the attitude of South African Jews under apartheid without analyzing the history of anti-Semitism in South Africa, because one of the specificities of South Africa was that it was home to one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, and also one of the wealthiest Jewish communities in the world.
Right,
Okay,
right.
between 1948 and 1994, under apartheid, the South African Jews have been in terms of fundraising and financial transfer to Israel per capita, they have been the wealthiest, the first community to transfer money to Israel. Okay, because they were so wealthy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, and that wealth, where did it come from? This is something another issue that people don't want to deal with.
Yeah.
It came from the exploitation of black people.
People. Yeah.
It came from the exploitation of our brothers and sisters in South Africa. So going back to the history of anti-Semitism, okay, we obviously don't have time to go through that. People who are interested, they can read the books, excellent books that are written by a historian, South African historian named Milton Shane. Okay, so he wrote two books on several articles, but I'll just call two books on the history of anti-Semitism in South Africa. So the first one is this one, published in 1994, The Roots of Anti-Semitism in South Africa, published by Milton Shane, 1994. And another one that I'll be talking about briefly is this one, Perfect Storm. Okay, Perfect Storm. Anti-Semitism in South Africa, 1930-1948. So in this book, he's showing that in the 1930s, late 1920s, up to the creation of Israel, basically, or at least up to when South Africa joined Britain in the Second World War, 1942, I think. Anti-Semitism, the Jewish question has been a central question in South African political life. Okay, and in fact, anti-Semitism was pervasive among the Afrikaner community. Okay, especially the descendant of the Dutch
Yeah.
Huguenots in French and German. Huguenots is French Protestants and German settlers. Okay, so between the late 1890s, okay, the late 19th century, up to 1920, the Jewish population in South Africa doubled. Doubled. There are a lot of Jews, especially those fleeing persecution and pogroms from Eastern Europe, that immigrated to South Africa. Okay, and that influx of population from Eastern Europe was not very well perceived. Okay, in South Africa, and if you look at the parliamentarian debates in the 1930s, you will see that many, if not most, politicians, especially members of the Afrikaner Nationalist Party, okay, that took over in 1948 and institutionalized apartheid, they were very hostile to Jews in general and Jewish migration in particular. So I'm just going to quote two politicians of that time. First, Paul Sower. Okay, so he was a member of parliament of the National Party. So during parliamentarian debate in 1938, this is what he said. He said, in connection with the Jews, the National Party is opposed to further immigration because there are already too many Jews in the country. Another reason is that the Jew is unassimilable and always remain a Jew. He never becomes a true citizen of the country like members of other nations. A further reason is that when a Jew comes to South Africa, within a short time he enters commerce or one of the professions, and the ethical standard of that commerce or of the profession is lowered or undermined. The Jews take work out of the hands of our own people and bread from their mouths. Our duty calls us in the first place to our own people. Okay, Paul Sower, 1938. Okay, then you had another prominent member of the National Party. In fact, he became the leader of apartheid, prime minister, 1948, Daniel Francois Malan. As his name suggests, he has a French background, French origin. Malan has a lot of prominent leaders in the South and during apartheid whose last name was Malan, like Magnus Malan, Minister of Defense. Anyways, Daniel Francois Bouna, he was interestingly the first head of government of the Commonwealth to visit Israel in 1952. There's a photo of Daniel Francois Bouna with first prime minister in the history of Israel, David Ben Gurion. Okay, if you type on Google, you will see. But this is what Daniel Francois Bouna said in 1938. Behind communism and liberalism, there was a power which had grown tremendously of late, a power that made itself felt during the last election. That power was Jewry. You see, this is what he was saying in 1938.
Yeah.
So anti-Semitism was a key element of South African political life in the 1930s, late 1920s, up to 1942. Or we can even say up to 1948 with the creation of State of Israel, which some of the leaders perceived as a way to get rid of the South African Jewish population. Okay, so since they have that state that is supposed to be hosting Jews from all over the world, it was a way for them. They saw it at least as a way to make it possible, okay, to make the emigration of Jews possible to Israel. So this is only a reflection of the pervasiveness of anti-Semitism in South Africa at that time, because in the press and the literature and cultural industries, cinema, so on, they had projected a very negative image of the Jews. Okay, yeah. One of them was Peruvian. Okay, Peruvian, which was a racial slur, racial epithet they used against the Jews. It was typically the Eastern European Jew, who migrated to South Africa and was considered as a peddler, delinquent, people living off theft, and they were opposing them to the Anglo-British Jews. Okay, so they had the dichotomy between the Jews that were well integrated and the Jews who could not integrate because they were from a region in the world that made them unassimilable, okay, or unabsorbable, okay?
Yeah.
So this is the background, anti-Semitism. But 1948 was a turning point, okay, because in 1948, they institutionalized apartheid. And like I said, 1948 was also the creation of the State of Israel as an independent state, independent settler colonial state. So when apartheid was institutionalized, the leadership of the apartheid regime made a deal. They made a deal with the representative of South African Jewish organization. The deal was a racial contract, quote unquote. Okay, the deal was, since we are all white, you are white, we are white, since we are all whites, we have to unite. Okay, we have to make a racial pact so that we can benefit from the exploitation of black people. And unfortunately, the leadership, of those South African Jewish organizations accepted that deal, basically. Okay, Some people have argued that that deal was accepted because they were so afraid of the anti-Semitism that I've just described. And remember, we started with the interview with reference to John Vorster, who belonged to powerful pro-Nazi organization, Osewa Brandwag. Okay, that organization had more than 300,000 members. Okay, so anti-Semitism there was very deep. Okay,
Yeah.
so some of those leaders were really fearing retaliation if they expressed any form of solidarity with the non-white
Okay.
majority. Okay, so they did co-sign the racial contract, and like I said previously, they benefited tremendously from apartheid, being one of the wealthiest, most prosperous Jewish communities worldwide.
Mhm.
Okay, but despite that, we had a conspicuous minority, extremely active, dynamic, and determined minority of South African Jews who were thoroughly involved in the liberation struggle. You know, in the tribute of the South African Zionist Federation that I have mentioned previously, they talk about those Jews who fought for Israel, including for the creation of Israel. Okay, one of them was Arthur Goldreich. Okay, he was one of Mandela's comrades.
Mhm.
Actually, he was the one who rented the farm where Mandela's comrades were, the farm that was raided in 1963. Okay, Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia in the suburbs of Johannesburg. So when the apartheid police raided that farm, where the ANC and their comrades were preparing the details of the armed struggle
Mhm.
against the regime of South Africa, they arrested some of Mandela's comrades. Well, all of them were Mandela's comrades, but then you had blacks, Indians, and whites. Okay, so one of the Indian South African arrested there was Ahmed Kathrada, who spent
Okay.
25 years in prison. He
Mm.
spent 27. You also had Kovat Beki, Raymond Blaba, Elias Motsoaledi.
Mm.
Um, they also arrested 5 South African whites. And all those 5 South African whites they arrested, they were all Jewish. Okay. So there was Arthur Goldrich, whose name I mentioned previously. And
Oh,
by the way, when he escaped in 1963, he was exiled in Israel.
okay.
Okay, and he fought for the creation of Israel in 1948. Okay, you also had Dennis Goldberg, who spent 22 years in prison, also
Okay.
Jewish. Harold Wolp, who escaped apartheid prison alongside Arthur Goldberg, spectacular escape in 1963. They escaped South Africa, I think, through Botswana. They were disguised as priests. Okay, it was a very spectacular
Mm.
escape. So also Jewish. You also had Bob Heppel, okay, from a Jewish family, Dutch Jewish family, and also Rusty Lionel. His name is Lionel, but everybody call him Rusty. Lionel Rusty Bernstein. Okay, so you see, in the 1963, at the Rivonia trial, all the co-defendants of Mandela and his comrades, Govan Beki, Ahmed Kaprala, they were all Jewish. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so this gives you an idea of the role, prominent role that some South African Jews played in the struggle against apartheid. Okay,
Yeah.
but those were not the only ones. Those were among the most famous because they were arrested and tried during one of the most famous trials in the world in the 20th century. But you also had other people who were engaged in the armed struggle engaged opposed to apartheid, and including some of them were engaged in the armed struggle against apartheid. You also had, for example, one of the chief of staff of Mkhonto we Sizwe, the armed branch of the ANC, the armed wing of the ANC, was a South African Jewish named Joe Slovo.
Mm.
Okay, Joe Slovo was born in Lithuania in 1926, and he came to South. His family migrated to South Africa when he was 10. Okay, then he became a lawyer, and he was defending um, blacks who were oppressed by the South African regime in court. He later became the leader of the armed wing, the chief of staff of the armed wing of ANC.
Mm.
His wife, okay, his wife, Ruth First, who was born 1925.
Yeah.
By the way, a few days ago, we were commemorating the 99th anniversary of her birth. She was assassinated by the apartheid regime in 1982 in Mozambique. Okay, so she's the mother of the African Revolution.
Mm.
We also have many other people. Albie Sachs, lawyer who later became Minister of Justice in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. We also have Ronnie Castles. Okay, Ronnie Castles, who was a member of the armed wing of the one of the founding members of Mkhonto Wesizwe. You know, there were a lot of prominent Jews, South African Jews, who played a key role in the struggle against apartheid. Okay,
Oh,
so
no.
I personally have a profound respect and admiration for those more than I do for including people like Mandela, because imagine those were people who had the racial privilege. They were whites. Okay,
Yeah.
so they could have benefited from the racial privilege like the rest of South African society, including the majority of the Jewish community in South Africa.
Mm.
They had good jobs. Okay, Goldreich and Rusty Bernstein were architects. Dennis Goldberg was an engineer. Joe Slovo was a lawyer.
Mm.
Okay, Rufus was a journalist, but still they decided to sacrifice all those privileges.
Yeah.
Okay, because they thought that the fight to make South Africa free, the
Yeah.
fight to liberate South African blacks from oppression was more important than the privileges that they could benefit from due to the fact that they were not only whites, they also had socioeconomic status that they could benefit from. Okay,
Yeah.
so they made class suicide and race suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, meaning that they abandoned the racial privileges and
Yeah.
also they abandoned the class privileges that they had.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's why part of the regaining the legacy
Yeah.
of our ancestors is to study thoroughly the history of those South African Jews who fought apartheid. Okay, and we have to study their history, taking into account that their history has been, some people have been trying to rewrite that history
Right.
to make us believe that the overwhelming majority of Jews fought apartheid. It's not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. It also should make us think about the price that we have to pay for some of the privileges that we can benefit from. Okay, so
Yeah.
in exchange of being co-opted in the group of white,
Yeah.
they would have had a normal life, you know, enjoying the exploitation of
Yeah.
the black, you know, and also having a normal life like the majority of whites in South Africa, including South African Jews. But unfortunately, after the fall of apartheid, the same South African Jewish organization who were silent during apartheid, they came out and they were trying to make it look like they supported all these South African Jews who fought apartheid, including through armed struggle.
Right.
Okay, the reality is that when Rufus, Joe Slovo, Leonen and Hilda Bernstein, Anne Marie and Harold Wald, Dennis Goldberg, Archie Goldrich, Ronnie Castles, they were marginalized by their own community. And in fact, in 1963, during the Rivonia trial, like I said, all the co-defendants of Mandela and his comrades were Jewish, but the prosecutor himself also was Jewish.
Mm.
He was not only Jewish, he was one of the leaders of the South African Jewish community in Johannesburg.
Okay.
His name is Percy Utah.
Mm.
Okay, and Percy Utah was one of the prosecutors at the Rivonia trial. And during the Rivonia trial, he was trying to teach the Jews who were siding with blacks, he was trying to teach them a lesson.
Mm.
He was trying to teach them a lesson. The lesson was that they had to be loyal to the
Yeah.
state that was granting them racial privilege.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you type on Google Percy Utah, you will find a photo with him and Nelson Mandela. That was after Nelson Mandela was freed. And since after Nelson Mandela was liberated, he also has been trying to rewrite history. Okay, saying that as a prosecutor, I could have recommended that they be killed. Okay, instead I recommended a sentence that would not get them killed, but rather a sentence to life imprisonment.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hey, this kind of shows, not to cut you off, but this kind of shows how, white privilege, white privilege only works when you don't take a stance. Once you choose to go against the oppressor, they will come after you. They don't care if you're white, man.
Of course. But it also applies to some of us, black people living in the diaspora.
Yeah, of course.
You can be co-opted by the oppressive imperial colonial system to oppress your own brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
That's why it's not a coincidence that Now that the US is co-signing the genocide in Palestine, you see some black African Americans have top positions, top-notch position in US imperial system. You know, who is the
Absolutely.
vice president of the US as we speak? Kamala
Black.
Harris.
Yeah.
She's black, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Secretary is Minister of Defense, right? Lloyd Austin, also African American.
Also, yep.
The Chief of Staff of the American Army, Charles Q. Brown, he's also African American. You see, the head of the AFRICOM, the U.S. Command in Africa, Michael Langley. Okay, his last name is also the name of the city where the CIA is based. It's a coincidence. I don't know if it's a coincidence. He's African American, and the U.S. ambassador to the UN, the one who's always voting the against ceasefire.
Yeah.
Okay, Linda Greenfield, she's also African American.
Well, some people say they want representation, so there they go.
Representation to do what? Representation to oppress your own people or
Right.
other people. It's
Right.
like having like black sheriffs or black heads of police.
Absolutely.
Be
Yeah.
able to implement exactly the same policies.
White hegemony in black faces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is a lesson, like the lesson, the examples. Okay, the examples of Ruth First, Joe Slovo, Hilda and Rusty Bernstein, and others, Dennis Goldberg, all these South African Jews whose name I have mentioned, and who played a significant role in the anti-apartheid struggle. Some of them have even lost their lives. As I said, Ruth First has been killed in 1982, okay, in Mozambique. She could have stayed in London. She was exiled in London for some time. But in 1976, after Mozambique got independent, she said, I feel the necessity to go back and help my people. Okay, she said in one of her most famous book, I count myself an African, and there is nothing I hold dear. This is Ruth First.
Yeah.
Okay? And let me quote her again when she was in prison. Okay, there's this sentence which I found very powerful, and I would like to quote here for our audience. So she was in prison, like I said, she was detained in 1963 because she was writing anti-apartheid articles. She was detained for 170 days. 170 days is the title of a book she wrote during her detention. It's right here. This book. I don't know if you can see it.
Who's first? Yep. 117 days.
170
Absolutely.
days. And this is what she writes about her why, despite the fact that she was white and had all those privileges, she decided to engage in the anti-apartheid struggle. So here's what she writes. Our consciences were healthy in a society riddled with guilt. Yet, as the years went by, our small band led a more and more schizophrenic existence. There was the good living that white privilege wrote, but simultaneously complete absorption in revolutionary politics in defiance of all the values of our own racial group. As the struggle grew sharper, the privileges of membership in the white group were overwhelmed by the penalties of political participation. This is what you write in 170 days.
Right.
And there's also another book that was written by a journalist. His name is Grant Frankel. Okay, so the book is titled Rivonia's Children. Rivonia's Children, Three Families, and the Price of Freedom in South Africa. So he's basically describing the impact of the engagement of Rufus, Joe Slovo, Hilda Bernstein, Hilda. So here you have Rufus, Hilda and Rusty Bernstein. This is Anne-Marie Wolp with her children. Okay, Anne-Marie Wolp, whose husband was detained in Rivonia when they made their raid in 1963. He escaped. But Anne-Marie Wolp's brother, Jimmy Cantor, was tried at Rivonia. He was found not guilty. Then he was exiled in London. But the detention had very dramatic, disastrous impact on his health. So he died actually a few years after he was liberated from jail. So this is the journal is basically describing the impact of their engagement on their family lives. Okay, and I would just like to quote, two paragraphs, one on Joe Slovo and the other one on Hilda and Rusty Bernstein. So the book has been written by he's anti-communist, the journalist. He's anti-communist. The thing is that they were wrong in terms of ideology. Okay.
Yeah.
Communism is a lot about lies, blah 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 blah. He's anti-communist, anyways. But as an anti-communist, he has to acknowledge that the contribution of these South African Jews was South African Jews, communists for most of them. Most of them were communists. This also explains why they were engaged in the struggle. He still has to confess that what they did was extraordinary. Okay, There are examples for humanity. Okay, for example, about Joe Slovo, this is what he writes. Many people of working class background who claw their way to success and a university degree would have inevitably turned their attention to accumulating wealth and all of the comforts they had been denied in their youth. But Joe Slovo was different, perhaps because of his immigrant origin or his early exposure to Marxism or the spirit of the decade in which he came of age. Joe possessed a sense of idealism that drove him not toward money but toward the political movement that became his life's work. While some of his comrades would question his judgments, and many, including his wife, would come to criticize his uncritical devotion to the Soviet Union, no one could doubt his commitment or his willingness to make personal sacrifices for the cause. Okay, this is what Glenn Frankel write about Joe Slovo. Like I said, was
Yeah.
one of the leaders of the South African Communist Party, and
Hmm.
also was the head of the military operations of the armed wing of the ANC. Okay,
Yeah.
the first white to reach that position. And the very last three paragraphs of the book are dedicated to Hilda and Rusty Bernstein. Rusty Bernstein was one of the co-defendants of the during the Rivonia trial. He was also one of the whites that were arrested at Rivonia in 1963.
Mhm.
And him and his wife, who was also a community activist back then, thoroughly involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, had been harassed, and then they were exiled in London. And when Mandela was inaugurated as president of the Republic of South Africa, they came back to South Africa. So the paragraph that I'm going to quote now is a description. It's actually the last three sentences of the book, basically describing Hilda and Rusty Bernstein reaction when Mandela was elected president of the Republic of South Africa. Okay, let me quote Glenn Frankel. So he said, everyone there had been big players in the same struggle. They were elderly now, and like Ray, here he's referring to Ray Alexander Simmons, who was also another South African white Jewish anti-apartheid militant. Like Ray would soon be gone. Their lives had been reduced to the concerns of old age, the size of their pensions, the cost of living, the fortunes of children and grandchildren, the weather. Yet they had been part of a remarkable and historic moment. They had resisted one of the century's great tyrannies. They had taken a risk that others of their background and social status would not take, had eschewed comfort and thrown away security when others chose to go along and reap the benefits of silence and moral compliance. They had lost their battle, but the war had been won. They would die in relative anonymity. History claims 1,000 like them by lunchtime each day, but they had made their stand. The meaning of life is not a fact to be discovered, but a choice that you make about the way you live. Hilda had told me when we first met. Hilda, Rusty, and their comrades had made their choice.
Mm.
You see, this is the type of history that we have to regain.
Hmm.
Okay, because obviously most whites under apartheid did not support,
Yeah.
black freedom struggle.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
among those whites, we have to learn the lessons of those who are willing and ready to sacrifice class and race privilege for the cause. So we
Hmm.
are the South African Jews who embody what I call this the Judeo-African revolutionary tradition.
No
That's
doubt.
my
That's
own.
it.
That's not an academic.
That's your term.
I haven't read it anywhere, but this is something that the lesson that I have learned from them. So
Yeah.
that's why I think we shouldn't waste our time trying to respond to the accusation of the pro-Israel lobby. Because what do we say? Anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic. We
Yes.
have in our own tradition some Jews, despite the fact that they had their racial privilege, they were willing to sacrifice for the cause.
Yeah.
And this should be our role models.
Yeah. Yeah.
And unlike what has been said, most of them did not support what has been done in Palestine for the simple reasons you cannot condone settler colonialism in Palestine and fight it in South Africa. In fact, Arthur Goldrich, who, like I said, who lived in Israel after he was exiled from South Africa, after he escaped South Africa, in his last years, he was very critical of Israel. He was even comparing to the apartheid regime, and many of them have done so. Dennis Goldberg, who passed away a few years ago, he also said that Israel is an apartheid state.
Mm.
And many of the Jews, they were very, Joe Slovo was anti-Zionist. Many of them were very critical. So the irony is to see organizations that have been historically Zionist, but have not contributed whatsoever to the anti-apartheid struggle,
Hmm.
trying to falsify the legacy of these very brave extraordinary men and women in
Mm-hmm.
order to justify what is going on in Palestine.
Yeah.
And by the way, organizations like the South African Jewish Board of Deputies had to apologize to the sons and daughters of these South African mavericks. Right? If you a few years ago, I read an article on the Forward, which is a Euro-American Jewish journal.
Yeah.
Or maybe I shouldn't say that. The journal based in the U.S. Okay, that is catering to the Jewish community there.
Okay.
It was an article about the South African Jewish Board of Deputies apologizing to the sons of Arthur Coleridge for abandoning them during apartheid. Okay, the president of the South African Jewish Board of Deputies basically said that they had to care for the interest of the Jewish community during apartheid, and they apologized for not protecting the Jews who were oppressed by the apartheid regime. So this is something that we also have to bear in mind.
Right.
Those who are teaching us lessons of humanity, or being brave, were not on the right side of history a few decades ago.
That's it.
Ruth first, Joe Slovo, Hilda Bernstein, Krista Bernstein, Harold Wolf, Anne-Marie Wolf, Dennis Goldberg, those was on the side of history, the right side of history, and they paid for it. Some of them paid their lives.
Absolutely.
Some of them spent almost 80,000 days in prison.
Mm-hmm. That's deep, man. I appreciate you giving us this history, man. Okay, I have one more question. One of the frequent comments that we get when we talk about the necessity to express solidarity with the people of Palestine is that we African people already have a lot of problems to deal with. Other people also argue that Palestinians have not done anything for the Black liberation struggle, which, it's obviously false. We spoke a little bit about the missing, our people not necessarily being in touch with our radical history. But what would you respond to that?
Well, like you said, it's based on ignorance of the radical history. Also, a result of the lack of people lacking the capacity to connect different struggles that are taking part in different parts of the world. Let me give an anecdote. In 2000, after George Floyd was assassinated, there was a leaked memo of the Anti-Defamation League, okay, which basically said that was recommending that they stop the exchange programs between U.S. police, police force, military, and Israel. Okay, so they were having those exchange programs. Okay, one of the reasons why they wrote that memo was that people would then make the link between the way the police treat Black people in the U.S. and the techniques that they have learned in Israel. Okay, but finally they decided that they would pursue the exchange. So you have this organization ADL that is supposedly a civil rights anti-racist organization that is facilitating exchange programs between Israeli army and U.S. police force, which is that's why the Black Lives Matter, despite all their shortcomings, they were able to make the link between Ferguson and West Bank or Gaza. Basically, what were they learning in those trainings? Three things mainly. There was a report, was published a few years ago. It's called the Deadly Exchange. You can Google it, you will find it. Very easy to find. But it's basically saying that the US police force who were trained in Israel, they were basically learning three techniques. Okay, three sets of techniques. First of all, racial profiling. Okay, and even Donald Trump has recommended the US to get inspiration from the racial profiling as it's practiced in Israel. So racial profiling, okay, infiltration, infiltration of activist movements, okay, and repression. Okay, they were even selling some technologies, to repress demonstrators. I think there's that tear gas. Is it called a tear gas? It's called skunk. Okay, it was designed in Israel. Okay, so when it's poured on activists, the smell stay in the clothes and skin of the activists for a very long time. This is something that has been important for Israel. So this is an example of how the treatment of the Palestinians is directly linked with the treatment of people like us who are living here as diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the US, because Palestine is a laboratory. The techniques that are techniques and technology that are experimented there are then applied and exported to other parts of the world, including in countries where we are living. You and I live in France. In
Yeah.
2023, when there were the uprisings against police violence after a young teenager of Algerian descent was assassinated, the French Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Interior, they wrote a telegram. They sent a telegram to the Israelis asking them for their expertise. And these are the same thing they have done in 2005 when there were uprisings of the post-colonial youth in France. So you
Right.
see, the way, why did they do that? Because they want to treat us, they consider us as the Israelis consider Palestinians.
Absolutely.
So for
Yeah.
them, the Israelis have given them the blueprint of treating non-white people in their own countries.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Mm-hmm.
And we've also talked about, oh, sorry, another anecdote. In 2018, okay, Benjamin Netanyahu, he was talking about the fence they built at the border with Egypt. He said, without the fence, we would be faced with severe attacks by Sinai terrorists and something much worse, a flood of illegal infiltrators, meaning illegal migrants from Africa.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So you see, for him, African migrants are more dangerous than the terrorists.
Yeah. We know how they
So,
think.
so because, why are you saying that? Because Israel has also been exporting technologies to build fences,
Yeah.
okay, to build fences and to regulate, or how they say, to repress migrants, including those who are coming through the Mediterranean Sea. You know, the drones and all the technologies. Israel also part of that. They also have like Elbit, which is one of the main arm manufacturers of Israel, has also, invested heavily in those technologies.
Mm.
Okay, we've also went through the historic relationship between not only South Africa and Palestine, but also Black liberation movements and organizations and the Palestinians. So this is something that people have to delve into because this is part of history that is invisibilized, part of history that a lot of people don't know of. Okay. And the last point I would make is that we don't have a transactional conception of solidarity. Okay. At least I don't. Okay, I'm not saying we're going to support Palestinians because in the past they have supported us or because I expect them to support us for other struggles. No, they are currently going through maybe one of the first televised genocides in history. Live. It's live. Okay, we are not getting the images 1 year or 1 month later.
Mm.
It's no. And
Live.
the least we can do as human beings is express our solidarity.
Absolutely.
And if we don't, if on something, the same thing happens to one of our, to our brothers and sisters, wherever they might be in the world, you cannot call for other people to support you because, they don't like Palestinians more than they like black people. So if they can do this to Palestinians, what will prevent them from doing it to black people? You know the level of
Absolutely.
anti-blackness. Okay,
Absolutely.
one of the issues that people have is the level of anti-blackness in Arab countries, which is true. It's something that we're
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
deny.
Yeah.
This is true.
Yeah. Of course.
This is something that we have been very public and outspoken about. It's not something that we're going to hide. But you know that if they can do this to Palestinians, imagine what they will do to blacks. And
Yeah.
when they were doing these things to blacks, okay, when they were devising those chemical weapons that were aimed at eradicating the black population in South Africa, who was there in solidarity with the South Africans? It was the Palestinians and the
Mm-hmm.
PLO.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel was on the other side. Israel was providing weapons. Israel was providing nuclear technology to South Africa. So we have to be serious about the type of analogies that we're making. We have to be serious about studying our history, despite the fact that, like I said, I'm not going to blame many of our brothers and sisters for not knowing much because this is something that has been invisibilized. Okay,
Yeah.
all the books,
Absolutely.
you and I are not native English speakers. All the books that I have mentioned, they're all in English. If they
Right.
are not available in French, there is a reason for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because
Right.
there is no interest, okay, in these issues by French people issues, and also because people don't want us to know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So this
Yeah.
is part of the
Simple.
process of
Yeah.
regaining the legacy of our people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Appreciate that. Yeah. There's a long interconnected struggle. Black liberation and Palestinian. And the video that you spoke about earlier, the link to that video is going to be down in the comments as well. So definitely check that out. Um, Man, Bouna, appreciate you, my brother. speak a little bit about, your podcast that you have going on with the great Dr. Gerald Horn, Mayibuye, which I'm also honored to contribute with. So yeah, please tell the listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, Mayibuye is an internationalist Pan-Africanist program that we have launched 3 months ago. So it's a monthly program with Dr. Gerald Horn, historian, political activist. He has the Moose Church of African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's also a long-time political activist in anti-racist, Pan-Africanist, and working class struggles. He's written over almost 50 books now, and he's been active in the anti-apartheid and Palestine solidarity movements for decades. And for us, it's a real honor to have him to participate in those programs that are also, aimed at consolidating the relationships between African organizations throughout the world, not only in the continent but also throughout the diaspora. So it's in English, obviously, because Dr. Horn is African American, but there's a simultaneous translation in English and Spanish. Okay, so this is organized by several organizations, including the Pan-African League, UMOJA, which we're a member of, and Movimiento Panafricanista, based in different parts of Latin America, so-called Latin America, so in the Caribbean, South America, etc., and even in Europe.
Absolutely. Thank you. I will have also the link to the latest Mayibuye down in the description. So, like I said, there's also going to be the list to a few books that Bouna referenced and a few more that he recommended. The list is down in the description. One more thing before I let you go. Could you speak a little bit real quick on the importance of what's going on now around the world, with the students, the students in universities standing up in solidarity with Palestine? To be honest, I'm a little bit surprised in a positive way, because sometimes, I tend to be a little negative looking at this world. Like you said, we're witnessing, live, we're witnessing the genocide, and I feel like we're never doing enough. But it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to see young, students, involved like this. So what do you think about it, and what would be your word to all these students that are kind of, standing in solidarity with Palestine?
Yeah, shout out to all the students in the US, in Europe, in Latin America, in Africa, wherever they are, especially in Europe and in the US, because that is where the repression is
coming from.
Highest.
Yeah.
Very tough repression.
Yeah.
Right? So shout out to them. I think there have been even messages from Gaza thanking those students for the move they're making. I think it's a historic events that we're witnessing right now, and I hope that will be intensified, radicalized somehow. Although I wouldn't be, I wouldn't like to be whipped by those police clubs. But anyways, they are showing us the way.
Yeah.
The price that we have to pay for other people to be free, to confront genocide. Because they are doing it because they're aware of their states, their universities being involved in co-signing the genocide, the oppression of the Palestinian people. And they say this has to stop. And it's also helping us to unveil the real nature of our states, calling themselves democratic, but are showing also their fascist tendencies, in the current context. And the students that are now mobilized in the US, in Europe, and different parts of the world, they are the vanguard. I hope it will be sustainable. If it's sustainable, these students will be considered the vanguard of the fight against fascism, in global fascism, not only in Palestine, but global fascism in the 20th century. So shout out to all the students. And I've been to some of the demonstration myself here in France, and I've been very impressed by the determination, motivation, and the uncompromising stance of those students. So these are examples for humanity.
No doubt, no doubt. Much respect to all the students, a lot of strength, keep it going. And, like Bouna said, it has to be sustainable. So if you're not, I would encourage all the students, if you're not already in one, please join an organization, join a radical organization, because, the fight is long. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a 1-month thing. It's not a 1-year thing. It's an ongoing struggle, and we need as many people as we can on the right side of history, like you said. Bouna, thank you, my brother.
Thank you. And looking forward to coming back on Vital Hoops.
No doubt, man. We have you anytime. This is your home, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, my brother. Uhuru.
Tahia Palestine. Uhuru.
All right, this is it. If you checked out part 1 and part 2, this has been a lot of very important material. This has been meticulous, educational. So once again, shout out to my brother and comrade, Bouna and Mbaye. Make sure you check out the description. Click on the links, check out the book recommendations. Check out the Mayibuye podcast with Dr. Gerald Horn. And we appreciate you for checking out the Vital Hoops podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, let us know what you think. Vital Hoops podcast, for the people, by the people, for the culture. Uhuru.